Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mel. Thank you as always for hosting us. Again, my name is Molly Mowery, and I'll just quick. Uh-oh. There we go. Just do some quick intros. As Mel said, my name is Molly Mowery. I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Community Wildfire Planning Center, located in Littleton, Colorado. It's an organization that I co-founded with my colleague Carly Johnston. And we have a long, wonderful history with the Vail Board of Realtors, as well as Eagle County. We all collaborated and co-founded the REALFire Program. Well, about 10 years ago almost. So it's been a really nice opportunity to maintain the relationship and see how things move forward. Let's go to Katie next for your address.
I'm Katie Jenkins. I'm the Wildfire Mitigation Specialist for Eagle County. This will be my first year presenting to you all. I've attended the last two presentations. But usually my supervisor, Eric Loveman, if you're familiar with him, will do the presentations. I'm the mitigation specialist, and so a lot of what I do is community outreach, volunteer coordination, all of that fun stuff. So I'm generally out in the community talking to people and trying to get people to participate in my programs. So thank you for having me. Here's a very nice name tag that I just got a week ago.
And John gets the circle.
Yes, I'm John Morse. I'm with Comparion Insurance Agency. I'm a local agent here in Edwards, represent about 10 or 12 different companies. I've been an agent for about 15 years, so I have a lot of knowledge, especially with the local, what's going on now with wildfire. And I'm sure everyone in this room has had issues with home insurance, with clients getting it, or if you're listing a house, with the buyers getting it as well. So here to kind of speak to that as well.
So just by a show of hands, how many of you have attended one of these courses before? Oh, great. Welcome back. And how many of you have heard of or are familiar with the REALFire program? Great. Well, hopefully you will take away some more information if you're familiar or new information about the program. But we're also going to do an overview primer very, very quickly on wildland fire and wildland urban interface basics, really just so you understand what sets up what Katie is going to tell you about what Eagle County is doing. She'll share more about the Colorado wildfire context. And then we'll talk more specifically about Eagle County activities and how they relate to wildfire mitigation and preparedness. John, as he said, we'll talk about insurance considerations for mitigation, and then we will have a dedicated Q&A time and discussion, but this is really informal, so please ask us questions along the way. We will try not to use too many acronyms, but if there's just something we say that you want to clarify, or if you're just curious about a topic, raise your hand. We can always talk more about it during our discussion, but we want to make sure you follow the discussion as we go forward. So just who wants to share what they think of wildfire? This is not a trick question. How would you define a wildfire if someone says?
Any fire out of control.
Exactly, that's all it is. As opposed to something that would be called a controlled burn or prescribed fire, which is a very intentional way of putting fire on the landscape with a specific purpose in mind. So how do wildfires start? What is that?
Yeah.
Different ways.
Idiots, crop right,
Yes,
the corporate neglect, crop right,
yeah,
Mother Nature,
yeah,
marshmallows.
yeah, definitely right. Number one cause. So you hit the nail on the head. There are many human starts. It really depends on the region. So here in Eagle County, Colorado, we do have more lightning starts than other places. Some of our work is in Southern California, and 99% of the starts are human. So it really depends on your region, but predominantly everywhere there are more human causes. And some are accidental, out of fairness, they're not all idiots, but there are a lot of times where people are just using fire in ways that they aren't aware of how quickly it can escape and how easily it can ignite. So so we have an emphasis on prevention as well as the preparedness that we'll talk about. Once they start, how to keep burning? Fire, yes, there's 3 elements that keep fire going in order to sustain the combustion process. You need fuel, oxygen, and heat. So we just talked about the heat sources. Once the heat source ignites something, then you need heat, oxygen, and fuel to keep the fire going. So if you alter what we call fire triangle, by the way, fire people love triangles, so not in this course, but if you were to take an advanced course, you would see many fire triangles of different sorts. So what we think about is, well, how can we alter the fire triangle to not to interrupt the combustion process? So basically, we can do that. Well, we can't really do that through oxygen, right? Because I have heard a long time ago of some academics trying to come up with a way to remove oxygen from the environment, but I don't think that was very successful. Heat, we talked about, on the one hand, not having the heat source from the beginning, right? So if you don't have a heat source that ignites the fire, then you're not going to have a fire. But if you have a fire that starts, this is where firefighting, suppression, response really comes in. You know, the retardant that you see getting dropped on fire from an air tanker, that's meant to slow, so it interrupt the process. So when the fire flames hit it, it can't burn as easily. But what we're really going to focus on is fuel, because that's something, without myself being a firefighter, without Katie being a firefighter, without Don being a firefighter, we look at, well, what is fuel? And how can we change fuel so that it's not there to burn in the first place? So this isn't really a quiz, but it is a little interactive. Where do you see, what are the built fuels pointing to in this picture? This is, by the way, somewhere in Eagle County a few years ago. What's that? Yeah. So there's the built fuels are pointing to homes, right? And the power line. And then what about the wildland fuels? It's mostly vegetation, right? In this case, it really is wildland vegetation. What about here? This is from actually the Smoky Mountains. By the way, all these pictures I'm showing you either had fire threat in them or experienced fire. So they're all in fire-prone areas. Can you see the cabins? There are cabins in the mountain.
Wood tapers.
Yeah, there's wood roofs, wood log cabins, and then similar wildland environment with the trees and vegetation. Okay, so this is from Redding, California. Does this look a little, this will look a little different. So where are the built fuels in this case?
Trees.
The homes. And the wildland fuels, what do they look like in this case? Yeah, so it's more cultivated, but we still consider it part of that wild land urban fuel complex. This area was threatened during the car fire a few years ago, like 2018, I think. So they had very active fire come right up to the neighborhood, but it didn't burn the neighborhood. This is from South Carolina, the Highway 9 fire from 2009. What about this case? This is, you can see built fuels here. Again, we have homes, but look at where this is pointing to. Why do you think that is? So that bottom.
Bacon.
That?
Bacon.
No, they're not vacant. The whole subdivision was built out, but only some of the homes burned. Does anyone know why? And the wind carried something. So this is where the fire started up here. In this area, and then it crossed through the forest and it progressed towards the neighborhood. You can see it kind of had some direct flame contact with these homes, but way down there, what would have happened? The embers. Yep. So embers get produced from homes, they get produced from trees, from bushes. Built and wildland fuels all produce embers, and then they have to land somewhere. So if they land somewhere that is receptive to them, and this is a close-up, you can see, I'm just gonna back up, because a lot of people think, oh, this is great. There's like hardly any vegetation. It looks like a great suburban kind of neighborhood that, you know, that doesn't look like it would be at any risk to fire. But actually, when you look up close within this 5-foot area that Katie's going to talk a little bit more about, there are bushes planted right up against vinyl siding with wood underneath the vinyl siding. And so when an ember lands there and it starts to burn, this is exactly what can happen if the home isn't prepared. So this is another slide from Colorado Springs, the Waldo Canyon fire. You can also sort of see, I know it's a little light, but there are a number of other factors that contributed to these homes burning. So these homes, this is a gully where the fire came up. And it was on towards the back, the flames were in the back of the homes, and the homes were set very far back from the edge of this gully, and there's no vegetation treatment that happens. So it's really overgrown, and fire tends to move up in this direction because it's kind of a wind tunnel for it. So in this case, there were other factors: topography, vegetation on the hillside, and lack of setbacks that contributed to fires burning here. So, well, you know, how many of you have heard the term wildland urban interface, the WUI? So oftentimes people, traditionally about 20 or so years ago, even 10 years ago, people thought, oh, the WUI's like kind of just out here. And actually they think of like where we are in Eagle County is the WUI because it's forested. And, you know, if you're in the mountains and the trees, then you're in the WUI. But what we really see from fires is any urban development pattern across this whole continuum of density can be at risk to fires under the right conditions. So the wildland urban interface isn't contained to just one portion of a mountain hillside, but it's really anywhere where those conditions set us up. Where there might be fire, where the embers and flames can travel, and what they encounter when they land or meet the fuels. So our goal and what we're really going to talk about today, except John will talk about some of the consequences of not reducing our risk in the wildland interfaces. Well, how do we approach this? And so we tend to think about it in 3 different ways. What are the 3 different scales where we can influence change, particularly with those fuels? We think about the building itself, and then the lot. How is the building in relationship to the lot? What's the landscaping on the lot? And then the community. So these 3 different scales all have different ways we can influence change about the different fuels. I know this is hard to read, but I want you to just focus on that inner circle where the words are a little bit bigger. So the term we use to get to this point of how do we prepare holistically is a fire adapted community. I know Katie will also talk about that in relationship to Eagle County's fire adapted community approach. And simply what a fire adapted community means is you're looking at a number of different activities and ways that a community can reduce its risk. Here are a few examples. One is with landscape treatments. So I know you have a few, and I think you'll mention a couple that are going on. That's at that larger scale of landscape. We'll talk about, well, can you apply prescribed fire intentionally to the landscape? Fuel breaks. Has anyone seen a fuel break? Kind of a large area where trees or shrubs or other vegetation will be managed. The Forest Service does a lot of fuel management and fuel breaks. They're also trying to do more prescribed fire when they can, but often it takes a lot of planning. And it's sometimes, you know, people are still not as receptive, even though it's a really great tool for the environment when it can be applied. Resident mitigation. Another show of hands, how many of you again are involved in or have interacted with the REALFire program at all? Great, so you're already part of the resident mitigation process. Residents can play a huge role. What we can do with that lot and building scale to help homes and people get more prepared for fire. Katie will talk a lot more about that. And then I tend to think of partnerships and community engagement as something we're all, if we care about fire, if we're engaged in fire, we're all part of partnerships and community engagement. And then a big piece, you know, my background is as a land use planner. So a lot of my background is always focused on this part of fire adapted communities in terms of plans, regulations. This is where you might have building codes, policies. What we have something called a community wildfire protection plan. that covers usually a whole area or neighborhood, so a whole county, in Eagle County's case, to really look at how do we plan for fire, how do we take these activities together and then reduce our wildfire risk. I'm gonna pause there a minute to Katie. Did anyone have any quick questions or comments on that portion of wildfire basics? All right, there you go, Katie. Push down to go next. Down, skip next. Once again, thank you guys all for having me today. I'm super excited to present to everyone. So the first thing that I wanted to focus on today is a fire that we had last year. So this is a picture of the Eagle River fire, which happened on September 7th of last year. Essentially what happened is we had a head-on collision at kind of the worst place for it to happen on Highway 6 in Red Canyon. And what it did was it had pretty severe impacts to traffic, both I-70 as well as Highway 6. Can I get a show of hands of people who were impacted? If you were stuck on one side, couldn't get your kids on the other side, all that fun stuff. I was actually in Salida and my dog was an Eagle, so it was kind of like, how the heck am I gonna get her? So the reason that I always want to focus on the fires first is to show you guys that we do have fires here in Eagle County. It's really important to stay ahead of those things by becoming a part of what we call those fire adapted communities. So a portion of the fire adapted communities wheel is partnerships and collaborations. So we're really lucky in Eagle County that we are a part of what's called the Eagle County Wildfire Collaborative. This is essentially a whole bunch of partners and stakeholders, agencies who have a say or an interest in wildfire mitigation and retaining our community as it is. Everybody in one space so that we can collaborate, come up with strategic projects that we can then implement together. So this is essentially taking everybody, breaking down the silos, being in one room, communicating. So these are things like fire districts. We're lucky enough to have the Colorado State Forest Service, as well as the National Forest Service in this group. Land trusts, all the way down to conservation districts, as well as the water and sanitation districts too. So it's a huge group of very, very expert level folks who we are in communication with. Molly touched on our community wildfire protection plan. So, or the CWPP, you'll kind of hear them interchangeably if you've ever heard that before. A CWPP is basically a huge plan that breaks down a certain area into different risks or risk areas so that we can then determine what projects we can implement in those areas. What this plan does is it essentially makes it easier for us to see what projects we can tackle, prioritize those projects, and then it also allows us to get federal funding as well as state funding. So that plan was completed in December. If anyone's interested in seeing that, it's a huge document. I think it's like 100 pages or something, but it's very cool. It breaks everything down and you can even see what's going on in your area of risk. So then I'll talk about a couple of the ways that Eagle County contributes to those fire adapted communities. The first one being landscape scale fuels reduction. So as Molly was saying, as you're driving down I-70, you've probably seen those fuel breaks. They're pretty obvious in the wintertime because they look like ski runs. You didn't hear from me, but they make good ski runs. If you're into skiing, that kind of thing. But essentially what we do is we take a look at the landscape and then we utilize modeling software to place strategic fuels reduction projects. We run that model to see how fire would impact it without a fuels reduction project. And then we place the fuels reduction and then see how it impacts it afterwards. So that's kind of how we come up with plans for those things. So a lot of the ones that you'll see on I-70 are up by Cordillera, Arrowhead, Beaver Creek, and then over across the street in Muddy Sheep. So this is a prescribed fire slide. So this is the Eagle County open space that runs along Brush Creek corridor. Does anybody live in Eagle and did they see the fire and the smoke and all that stuff? How cool was that to be able to drive through town and know that, you know, we can just burn in town and know that it's taken care of? I thought it was pretty cool. Anyways, so this is the Brush Creek burn. We burned about 320 acres up and down that corridor with assistance from about 70 firefighters, fire districts all across Colorado. And
From this, we were able to post task force of multiple firefighters so that they can literally go out and fight wildfires during their careers. So I like to point, I actually took both of these pictures. I was on the fire. This day I was in holding, which essentially means you have a prescribed burn area. And then there are people on the outside who are making sure that it stays within that area. So this is kind of what I like to point out. The picture on the right is the smoke impacts that firefighters get while they're on fires. And that was pretty crazy to me because they're in the smoke for hours at a time. So thank your neighborhood firefighter next time you see him. But the one on the right is actually a good example of how areas around a river can burn regardless of whether it's on a river or not. A lot of people are under the impression that because it is a wetland that it doesn't burn. We were able to burn out quite a bit of the dead fuels and open that space up. One of the major goals of this fire was to promote a healthy habitat for the river corridor, as well as conserve any of the healthy shrubs or the healthy vegetation. This is my video. On Monday of the prescribed fire, I was on the ignition team. So essentially you go out with your torches and you ignite stuff. So this is a video that I actually took. We were experiencing about 30-foot flame lengths. And kind of the area where I'm standing, that's about as close as I can get because it's so hot from the radiant heat from those flames. But the area where I'm standing is called the mastication line. So essentially the preparation for these prescribed burns is you take away that fuel so that the fire stays within the prescribed fire area. So now I'll get into how Eagle County contributes to fire adapted communities at a community level. So that those things are like private property assessments, and then we support homeowners with cost share assistance for mitigation actions that they take. We also have launched a new community chipping days throughout the county, which is awesome, and then I'll cover that in a second. And then we also operate our neighborhood ambassador program, which is essentially where we take community members, utilize their willingness to share information into their communities. So the REALFire property assessments, and we already raised our hands for this, but how many of you have had the assessment done?
One.
Oh, okay. It's okay. Cynthia is one of my volunteers, so she's great. So essentially what I do is I go take a look at properties and I make site-specific recommendations based on the things that I see. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of assessment. I really go out and make sure that I'm taking a look at everything that is specific to your house. A lot of people are under the impression too that I'll go out and tell them to cut all their trees away, which isn't, it's not true. Usually I have options for each thing. So I like to go out, educate the homeowner, and they can ask me questions as I'm talking to them about wildfire.
Yeah, people here in Wildfire, and I've not been told to take down my trees, so. I know that's what
is my testimony.
It's not a lot of things that it's so they want to follow. But you don't have to do, you get this list and you do what you want to do with it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So I'm not deputized to not come out and give you a ticket for not doing these recommended actions. You could, take the assessment and do one or two things, save the rest for a year later. Also with the cost share assistance program, it is a yearly program. So if you wanted to utilize that this year, we will most likely have the funding for it next year, the year after. So please take advantage of the program. So these assessments are completely voluntary. I do utilize a regulatory hat too. I go out and do building permit inspections. Those are required actions that builders, contractors, and private property owners have to take. This is more so me going and saying, hey, you're interested in decreasing your wildfire risk on your own property. And I'm going to tell you my best opinion to make that happen. These assessments also promote education. I like to have an open door, two-way conversation policy. I can go to your house and assess while you're gone, but I usually like to, answer your questions as we go. So also too, at the end of this assessment, I do give you a super comprehensive report. It's got pictures of everything that we talk about, recommendations, and then reasons behind those recommendations. So it's pretty thorough. And then once you complete, I usually say about 80% of those recommended actions, I come out re-inspect, and then I issue you a certification. So Cynthia has a certificate as well. But yeah, usually kind of where I interface with John's industry is if someone's going up against insurance for a renewal or a renewal, I can come out, do the assessment, make those recommended actions. And then once you complete those, get the certificate, you can give that to your insurance company. So now we'll kind of talk about our home ignition zone and the stuff that I will look for these assessments. Home ignition zone is essentially the zone surrounding your house, and it's differentiated based on proximity to the house. And that's where I look at your quality of your landscaping as well as the quantity. And then I also take a look at everything that's on the exterior that could potentially be impacted by embers, as well as how embers could get into the house. So if you think I'm gonna come in and see your dirty living room, it's not gonna. So actually I'll go over here because I feel like you guys can't see what I'm talking about. So we have 3 zones that I always look at. Your zone 1 is gonna be your most important zone, which is that 0 to 5 feet. So Molly touched on that slightly when she was presenting. So that's gonna be, I usually wanna see 0 combustible items within that first 5 feet. Essentially embers, what they do is they behave kind of similar to bleached snowflakes, right? So they'll blow, hit your siding, go down to the base, heat up whatever is there, right? So if you have combustible shrubs, bark mulch, which is what I run into a lot of the times, it can heat that up to the point that it ignites and then kind of smolder around and heat the stuff up on your house. That's where we'll see ignitions pretty often. When we get into, I'm sorry, the first one is zone 1A, sorry about that. Your zone 1 is out to 30 feet, which is where I really like to pay attention to how the fuels are connecting to your house. So if you have, you know, a ton of trees and landscaping that's connected to wildland fuels, that's probably where I'll come in and say, hey, we should probably thinking about some kind of fuels reduction. So maybe remove a tree here and there, and that way you interrupt that fuel continuity and the fire won't make it to the house. And then your zone 2 and 3, that kind of goes out to your parcel boundary. So it's kind of however much work you want to do out to that first 100 or 200 feet is all really important, but I usually make sure that people are very aware of what's going on within that first 500 feet. So when I come and do an assessment, I always look at your exterior features. So first and foremost, some of the most important ones are your roofing material, your siding, and then stuff that is built underneath your deck. What is your deck made of? How are embers going to interact with the stuff, right? When I'm looking at roofing materials, I generally like to see, you know, something that is non-combustible. If you have a wood shake roof, I might say maybe time for replacement. I'm sure that the majority of you are probably aware of wood shake roofs, but after, you know, what you want to think about with those roofs is how embers are going to get in, right? So they're essentially a bunch of curled back wood shingles. So I usually like to see a class A roof or a class B. And then also too for, you know, roofs that are class A or class B. If I notice that any of the shingles are laying in the yard, or if you've noticed at all, you want to get those sealed up and make sure that it's not exposing the roof dead. Also, if I'm getting too construction heady, just give me the link and I'll be on my way. So the other stuff that I look at are things like vents. And so vents, any vent that leads directly into structures or attic spaces like soffit vents, gable vents, that kind of stuff. There really should be protection for a couple of reasons. One being for embers and one being for critters, right? Nobody wants critters in their crawl space. Yes, ma'am. Oh,
Maybe
okay.
swing up to them.
Yes.
Is there a microphone?
I don't know. I can talk.
I think it's the vent too, so
Oh,
you
yeah.
have to talk louder.
It's the vent. I wonder if it's straight. No. Can everybody hear me over there? Okay. So, the other thing I always look at are areas where embers will accumulate that are combustible, right? So a lot of the times it's like a combustible deck that's junctioning with combustible siding. You really want to have some kind of protection there because anywhere in ember lands, you just want to make sure that it's not combustible. The other things that I always pay attention to are the type of vegetation. Usually, is it combustible or less combustible? And if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to come check your house out. And how those things are interacting with combustible features of your house. So we really do a full scope of everything that's going on. So for landscaping, when I'm talking about what's combustible versus less combustible, generally conifers, so those are spruces, pines, firs, and then junipers. A lot of the times people have junipers in their landscaping next to their decks, that kind of stuff. Those cone producing species are generally more combustible, so when I usually see those, I like to think of options of how we can either mitigate around it or do some kind of other alteration to make sure that the fire cannot get to that tree and maybe to the house. So this is a IDHS Institute, which is the pardon, Insurance Institute for Business. Okay. So I was like international, it's not right. Insurance Institute for Business and Homeland Security. So essentially what they do is they do fire research and how fire will impact structures. So they did a study where they kind of blew embers onto both of these structures. If you look at the base of the one on the left, it is got gravel around the base. It has less combustible shrubs that are kind of pushed out and away from the house. And then it has this metal fence that's connected to the house. On the right, we have bark mulch, wood fence, and then some combustible siding. So they essentially blew embers onto both of these to see which one burned. The one on the left did not burn, and this one went up pretty quickly. So that's just kind of that's, you know, the importance of that fire-free file, so. And there's always options for everything too. So I like to tell homeowners that, you know, if you don't necessarily want to go the gravel or river rock way, or if you don't want to remove a certain tree, we have options. So this on the left is actually a certification that I did. The gentleman had removed all of his combustible shrubs and installed basically high quality topsoil, irrigated with some less combustible plants. So that's one option. Other option is to do some xeriscape. So this is up in Edie Creek, and essentially she wanted to make sure that she didn't have anything at all within 5 feet. Reason being because she didn't want to maintain it. So there's options.
I point out one other thing too on this. Sometimes it also, there's an interaction between what the building, the structure is made out of, and then what the vegetation is. So you have more options when it's a non-combustible. You can see it looks like real bricks, not a facade. Or where the window is. So a lot of times that's where it comes into play. You don't always have to cut a tree down a certain distance, but when you have a huge picture window and the tree is right in front of it, then there are less options to work with. So there's really a relationship between what the home / building is made out of and what the relationship is of the vegetation next to it.
Exactly. Thank you. So then we generate a super comprehensive report. It looks pretty much like this. It's got a picture of your structure on the front, and then it breaks certain features of the house down into the recommended actions. And I usually do recommended actions and reasons behind those recommendations because I don't want people cutting trees and they don't know why. So we go into, I think it's 6 sections. Branching out, I think it's 10 sections, but branching out into all the features that we talked about just a moment ago.
This question comes up all the time as people get really worried. They have this really comprehensive assessment and then they automatically think, oh God, my insurance agent's going to see all the problems with my house. And that is not what happens with this information. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this information is super confidential. It only goes into our database, which doesn't get shared with anyone. And essentially, we do not put it out to insurance companies. I literally just had this question yesterday, so thank you for bringing that up. But this report is for you and for you only, and you can utilize it however you wish. I know quite a few people have to share them with DRBs to show DRBs, hey, my wildfire expert was here and said that this is a risk. So we give you the report and that's the only thing, that's the only person that it goes to. This is a copy of Eric's certificate because he's such a great wildfire guy. So it spits this out, says that you have done the recommended actions based on an assessment from a wildfire professional. And this is what you can give along with the report to your insurance provider. If they are giving you brief about a renewal or a non-renewal. So I'll let John talk more about that, but this is under the impression too that you will maintain your vegetation or come back to us, in a couple years to see if we need to revisit anything. So this isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing. So these are examples of homes and properties that have been certified. And so you can see that there's still trees, there's still landscaping. And it still almost has like a foresty aesthetic to most of these. So a big thing that I like to tell people is that I'm most likely not going to come out unless you have 20, 30 dead trees around your house. I'm most likely not going to have you remove a ton of stuff to the point that it's going to change the aesthetic of the property. Yes. So I usually require that they work together in order to get that certification, just because for duplexes, it's not completely useless, but if one side burns and the other side is most likely going to burn. And so that's kind of the education piece of this is, if you do have a duplex neighbor that speak with them, you can even give them your report. If I go out and assess one side and say, hey, this is what this person said about my side, can we work together? So, but yeah, usually I won't certify unless it's both teams involved. Yes, sir.
Is anything been done to reach out to, say, homeowners associations that require high combustible fuels to be planted on my property line or homestead, for example?
Homestead. So we do work with a huge portion of the homeowners associations within Eagle County. I'm not sure if you are familiar with Eagle Valley Wildland. Hugh Fairfield Smith is the basically the head of that, and he does a lot of HOA presentations. So very slowly but surely, we're getting a lot of them on our side too. So,
And last year, Colorado passed state legislation that prohibits HOAs to require combustible materials. I don't know, I just have to look it up. It's mostly around fencing, but I don't think the landscaping was included, but it's an educational opportunity, but at least that was a start saying, because that was a big Marshall Fire outcome, is they didn't want to have to rebuild with wood fences, so. Yeah, but it sounds like you already maybe are familiar with that legislation.
Well, just the framework after having built a house and saying why.
Yeah.
Especially when the setbacks 25 feet, and you're talking about 30 feet away. There was a line that would bust.
I do believe there is other state legislation that says that if a wildfire professional comes to your property and says that something is a risk, then it trumps the HOA, but I need, Melody, do you know anything about that?
I just saw the legislation that passed last year, and I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that is something, because that's what happens a lot, is I'll go out and things like homestead, where they require 6 conifers within X amount of feet of the house. But if it's deemed a wildfire risk, then they're willing to work with the property. If that makes sense. So if you want to sign up for one, I'm happy to go out and check it out. But just talk to me after. Yeah.
So this is where, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, along those lines, you said that you might be able to trump an HOA if the HOA doesn't want to do what you're recommending.
Correct.
How about the other side of the duplex?
That one's a hard one because it depends on the duplex. Those aren't necessarily HOAs, so I'm not sure if the legislation says anything for duplexes. Your best bet is to try to reach out to the other homeowner and, I can always come assess one side. I prefer to do 2, but you can then take that report, give it to them and say, hey, this is what this person said, so.
If that legislation is geared for HOAs, I don't think they come out with anything for owners yet, because wood shake roof, for instance, that means, if you're forcing the other side to get a new roof, that could be $60,000-$80,000, depending on, how big, so I don't think you wanted to step into that, wade into that pond, but yeah, the HOA, I know, I've talked to Eric about that.
Okay, perfect.
Too.
I never want to give information like that that's not 100% guaranteed, but One of the major ways that we support homeowners in these mitigation actions, because sometimes they can be an expensive thing, right? So Eagle County offers cost share assistance for both single family residences as well as HOA level and multi-unit complexes. For each individual property owner, they are qualified for up to $1,000 per year. So I can come back year after year. Per year of cost share assistance. And what that is good for is essentially any of the mitigation actions in the report that don't trigger a building permit. So it excludes re-roofs. $1,000 probably wouldn't do much for an $80,000 anyways, unfortunately, but it excludes decks and re-roofs, but it goes up based on the amount of homes and residences that it impacts. So if you have an HOA level project, we can give you up to $7,500. Now that does come with the cost sharing. So we expect a 25% match from you. So for example, for the individual homeowners, they can get reimbursed up to $1,000 if they put in $250. So if you get $1,250 worth of tree work, or if you buy screens or rocks or anything like that, we will reimburse you $1,000. And then also that bottom number, I just looked it up the other day. So we have applications from this year that account for $212,000 of cost share assistance. So it's pretty cool. Those are all promised. Not sure if all those projects are going to take place, but we have promised those fundings for both HOA level projects as well as private property projects. Does anyone have questions about cost share?
So what's the minimum? Yes.
So
To yourself?
so if we can give you up to $1,000, so if you do a project that's, $500, we'll give you 75% of that reimbursed. That makes sense. Up to $1,000. So if you have a $10,000 project, then we'll give you $1,000.
That's the next.
Correct, yep. And that always starts with an assessment. So I have to come out, take a look, give you the mitigation action report, and then you apply for that or for that program. Another great way that we've been supporting homeowners now is through our countywide shipping program. So has anybody been impacted by the big fire signs that go out and say the chipper is coming? Yeah, okay, perfect. So this is something that we launched this year. Essentially, we send out contractors to each individual neighborhood. These dates indicate that you have to have your slash stacked on your curb by that date. And then a chipper will come around and take it away. So if you guys get the assessment done and you're like, I want to do this myself, you cut your limbs, all that stuff. If you put your stuff out on this date, they will come get it. So right now, we've been doing this since May. So it's once a month for all of these communities since May. We've removed 385,000 pounds of slash. So our goal is 500,000. So 500,000 pounds of slash removed from the county. So this is just a graphic on, kind of what we will chip versus what we won't. So we won't take away your dimensional lumber. We won't take away your grass clippings, that kind of stuff. But like for the bigger stuff, we will take away. We'll take away branches, limbs, anything that can go into a chipper. So this is another thing that you guys can actually take part or be a part of if you would like. So this is our neighborhood ambassador program. This is essentially where we utilize people who are super motivated about wildfire, who are in the community and are wanting to make a bigger impact. Essentially, they come to me, I give them the resources, and then they can share that information with their neighbors. So the thought behind that is, are people going to trust someone from the government? Maybe, maybe not, but they do trust their neighbors, right? So this is just a way for us to get information out into the neighborhoods and create a broader impact for everyone. I do have an ambassador over here. This is Cynthia Thrall. And Cynthia has been a part of it since the beginning. I started this program 2 years ago. So it's pretty fun. And essentially what we do is we have meetings where I share information, what's going on within the county. And then I also help set ambassadors up with grants so that they can go out and do their own projects. So right now I have 22 volunteers who are kind of acting at various levels. So you can act as someone who's just getting the information from me and then sharing it. Maybe you have an HOA newsletter that you're a part of or a Facebook group, that kind of stuff. And I also have people who are doing awesome projects, which, Cynthia, do you want to hit on your projects?
You know, one of the requests, I guess, and complaints from the firefighters and emergency vehicles is they can never find an address. And so they know what street they're on, so I applied for a grant to host an event to give homeowners. It's just like a plaque like this big, and then you put on your address, just the number sign, because obviously, again, they know what street they're on. And so, interesting enough, we had this at, I had to reserve a park in Wild Ridge. And then people came, it was more like a interactive event, and so they would get this piece of metal. And then they put their address numbers on it. And then they can go get a post and put it somewhere where the firefighters can really tell what address what address is your house. Because I know actually my next door neighbor, her fire alarm went off. And the firefighters, they were off the road quite a bit, but they couldn't tell at all which house it was because it didn't have flames coming out of it. And it was a lovely false alarm, but that is really something for you to, like, let's say you need an ambulance or anything, you want the firefighters in emergency vehicles to be able to identify what driveways are so they can get to you. And so the people that showed up were just very appreciative and so hopefully it was like just a small bucket of people, there's, thousands of people out there, so a lot of people. But I think that in every neighborhood you're in, if you want to be part of this neighborhood ambassadors, that's a great place to start. Emergency people will be very appreciative.
Thank you. Yeah, so Cynthia was able to take grant funding, utilize it to produce her own address sign workshop, which was really awesome. And then another neighborhood ambassador of mine actually put together a chipping day on her own. So she doesn't lie within that Eagle County chipping day map yet. So she utilized our programs, and then I matched her with the Eagle County Foster Assistance Program to put on her own chipping day, which is really cool. So if you're interested in that, just talk to me and I'll get you set up. And now we're on to John, back to Molly, actually.
We'll just do a little, really quick recap, see who was paying attention. This is your quiz part. So we talked about how wildfires start. You had some great observations from the pictures. How do they keep burning? What are the three elements on that fire triangle that are required for fires to be allowed? Oxygen, fuel, and heat, right? Got it. So what do we pay most attention to when we're trying to alter the fire triangle for the purposes of today's conversation? Fuel. And what are some of the ways that we can alter fuel in and around a house?
Mitigation.
And what kind of mitigation? Things. Fences. Metal roof, metal fences, you can have a metal roof, you can have an asphalt shingle roof too. Those are perfectly acceptable. What are the top things, Katie, that you think you tell people about? Fire free 5, super important. And then definitely stuff that's under your deck that's kind of low hanging fruit, as I run into a lot of firewood in this valley, and it's pretty low hanging fruit that, once winter is complete, you're not using it anymore to either store it somewhere else or, get rid of it. So those are probably two big things. You really want to pay attention to if you're prioritizing what's closest to the house, essentially right after. So he also shared a lot about how Eagle County is a fire adapted community. In addition to the REALFire program, what are some of the other fire adapted community activities that the county is doing? Anyone remember? Tipping? That's where my eyebrows off, isn't it? Describe fire.
Send her out.
What?
send her out to check it.
Oh, assessments, yeah,
Yes, assess.
yeah. Anything else? Cost share assistance, is a big opportunity, you know, it may seem like, well, it's not a lot if you have a $10,000 bill for clearing some trees or removing some trees, but I can tell you a lot of other counties around the state don't offer anything, so it's a really good opportunity to take advantage of that.
The cost assistance, the homeowner owns both sides of the duplex, and they get $1,000 for each side.
You should be able to, yes. It's an application program that'll go through Mowery, but that should be generally how it goes. It's each single family residence.
Great, and the only other thing we talked about was the community wildfire protection plan. Ties it all together, so it's a lot of work both county focuses and coordinates their planning activities. All right, we passed the quiz, we'll go on to insurance.
So yeah, my name is John Morse, like I said earlier, I'm a local insurance agent. And basically what we're gonna talk about today is just, current Colorado insurance trends, which I'm sure everybody here knows is in the last year, at least year, if not 2 years, has gotten a lot tougher to insure homes, insure properties. Especially in certain neighborhoods like, Bellevue, Red Sky, a little bit in Bachelor Gulch, but just depending on where the homes are, so we'll kind of go into that. As well as, how mitigation can help. I know we've kind of hit that all afternoon. And then important coverages to consider so that you can kind of counsel your clients. What kind of, on an insurance policy, what are the important things to hit, depending if you're primarily living there or if you're gonna rent it out, or just as like a secondary home. As well as under insurance, yeah, I'm sure everybody heard, in the Marshall fire, that was a really big thing that people got hit with. Just due to the fact that they either haven't checked their policies in a while, or, that was just kind of the perfect storm where the cost of labor went up, the, inflation, and it just, it's just really unfortunate. As well as, the claims process, if your home does burn down, how can you navigate that? And, just like, if you have any questions as we're going through it, just feel free to, stick your hand up and ask. This is just kind of the home ignition checklist. We've talked a lot about this already, but the important ones, clean the roofs and the gutters. That's kind of the easiest missed.
Question, what happened with the result of the Marshall fire? Crap.
You mean the
Yeah.
crap, like the underinsurance or?
Yeah.
So one of the slides down further low, they did pass a law requiring insurers to give you a lot more extended coverage, so that shouldn't happen again. There were also lots of grants out there, for people to take care of. I know, Carr had a lot of money, National Association of Realtors did as well as a couple local, credit unions and stuff like that. But, I had 7 or 8 houses seven that completely burned down. And none of those were underinsured. There was one who the builder misrepresented the square footage, the basement level of a townhome. He said it was the basement, but it was above ground. But we just took that back to the insurer, and they, for the most part, the insurers that I worked with were pretty receptive as far as.
So it was eventually covered.
Yes, yeah, most of them, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, the most overlooked with the ignition checklist, and we've talked about it already too, is, kind of the gutters. If you haven't cleaned out your gutters, there's just a bunch of gunk just, sitting in the top as well as probably down the downspouts as well. And if it's been there for a while and an ember hits that, that's just, unfortunately a real quick way to start the fire on your house. Then replace or repair any loose or missing shingles. Again, if, even if it's asphalt shingle, and it's missing, that's an easy way in. Obviously, I'm sure you all have either listed or had a buyer looking at like a wood shake roof. And that makes it incredibly hard. I mean, back to your duplex point, I had a client probably 2 months ago, buying one side of the duplex. It was all wood shake roof. He had some other stuff going on, but we couldn't find anybody to do it unless we replaced the roof. The buyer or the owner on the other side didn't want to replace it, just because he had a policy already, but he basically called his insurer and he was paying a, outrageous sum just because of the wood shake roof, if you can find coverage. So they opted to go ahead and replace it just because it was, in the long scheme of things, it was, kind of cost effective for that owner as well. So I definitely encourage you to have conversations with both sides. Just because they might not even know if up here, they might not even live there most of the year, so they might not, realize they just figure insurance is X amount and that's what they're paying for. So, yep.
Have you ever seen, like an insurance company that won't give insurance if they, unless it's a fire assessment? Or if they deny someone insurance, would complying to a fire assessment make a difference?
So yeah, the fire once they deny it, the companies have gotten a lot harder once it's denied, it's a lot tougher to come back and say, oh, I moved this wood pile, oh, I did this, I did that. And they basically said statistically, if you've let your house, go into disrepair or have these issues, then you do, you go do all this, it's gonna come back to that. So I always encourage my clients to say, hey, before we, apply to this new company, or if we're shopping you around, why don't we do this fire assessment? That way you kind of use it as ammunition to the underwriters and saying, hey, this guy's being proactive. This is, everything that we've done already. Just because now, especially in Eagle County, they will, most companies will send inspectors out at the very least, if not look at like an overhead view of the property. And once they see, the mulch or the trees, it's really hard to come back and say, well, we're gonna cut that down, or we're gonna, remove the mulch. So it's more of being a proactive thing. And then again, back to the whole HOA viewpoint, if you can get, all of single tree, for instance, everybody does the fire assessment, that's gonna bring the overall brush fire score down for the area. Versus, if I'm the only person in the neighborhood who did that, and I have, houses on every side that didn't do anything, and there was a wildfire, it's not gonna help my single house out as much as it would if you had your whole neighborhood or even whole street do that.
I would just say, we see that it varies a lot right now across Colorado, so we do a lot of work in Jefferson County, Conifer, Evergreen, and many homeowners insurance policies are getting completely dropped. So it's one of the worst areas because it's rated one of the highest risk across the country. So in that case, sometimes the fire assessment can give an assessment and it may help. Other times, like John said, the insurance will require it, they'll do their own assessment. We see in Boulder County, they have had a long-standing similar program, a REALFire, in place for a long time. And there is some ability for people to use that certificate through wildfire partners and still maintain their insurance, but it really has become the Wild West in the last 2 years. 2 to 3 years. And so what everyone thought was just a California problem is really now across the West. Utah, Idaho, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, all the states are having really a patchwork of where insurance still is acceptable and where it's not.
And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Marshall Fire is really what I think, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, where insurers were just saying, oh crap, like we didn't even look at the brush fire wildfire score here, and we just lost 1,200 houses. So that really kind of scared them. And then in the last 2 years, they've really kind of realized the amount of losses that they had to take to rebuild, and that's what kind of really put a grip on them.
Is it true that 70% of the Marshall Fire people are underinsured?
I've heard that, and again, from my client, I didn't see that. One of the slides I'll talk to, I mean, it's really important to work with a local agent who knows the cost per square foot of building. I'd have the replacement cost estimator on a house in Boulder. So this is, we need to at least double what they're recommending, just because I know it's gonna cost a lot more to rebuild.
Can I get into that?
Oh.
Yes, there were many, many people underinsured. And that has been a historical problem in the state back in whatever year Waldo Kagan was, I think 2011.
Yeah.
Well, that was, many homes were underinsured back then. And we were trying at that time to say, especially through the Rocky Mountain Insurance Information Association, getting the message out, need to be insured, et cetera. So it's been a long-standing problem. But one of the things I think the dynamic people don't think about, I'm sure you do because it's your realtor, but the public doesn't think about when you purchase the home and how much the home has increased in value for the 20-year period of the front rate. It takes time to purchase for a very affordable price. Then it must get a little bit of a lot more. So there was already a very natural imbalance, and no one was complaining about having affordable home insurance.
Yeah, and I've already seen a shift, it's almost scary where. Right after the fire, I had everybody calling, hey, what's my home insured for? All right, what's it gonna cost to bump it up?
Yeah.
It's, another 1,000 or 2,000 a year, great, let's do it. And since then, I've had some of those people call back, and be like, hey, you know what, let's lower my insurance, I just need to lower my premium, and I was like,
Yeah.
most of the people I say I highly don't recommend doing it, or you should shop elsewhere, because I don't, as an agent, I don't wanna have that conversation if your house does burn down. Yeah, I wanna be able to be like, okay, great, we're gonna rebuild, so sorry, a year ago you told me to reduce it.
Yeah, what about replacement costs? I mean, you have a replacement cost policy, don't they have to cover replacement costs?
So there's very few carriers who do like offer a full replacement cost policy. There's, in my kind of wheelhouse, there's probably one, maybe two that do. The rest are just expanded replacements, so you bump that up.
That was my question. Can you elaborate on
Yep,
the difference?
yeah, let me
Misperceptions that most policies cover market value versus replacement costs, just cost of build.
Yeah, so that, it sounds kind of cheesy. I always tell my clients, or when I'm quoting somebody, just saying, hey, okay, you're paying, $4 million for this house in downtown Boulder. If you were to pick that house up and set it in Kansas, what, the insurance company is looking at what's it gonna cost to rebuild that house, not like the actual property value. So you need to, again, kind of go back to working with local builders, knowing what, the cost per square foot is, so that you kind of know what you're looking at. And then that's also kind of a loaded question if they're building with, kind of basic grade materials, or they're really doing a, $10 million house on, Meadow Road, Beaver Dam. But
What
that's,
are you using for the replacement cost?
I'll ask my client, hey, walk me through the house. What's, what are your floors made of? What's, this, and then I kind of take that, put it into a program, and then, take that and use that as well.
What square foot cost are you using?
It really depends where the home is. And that, I'd say in Eagle County, that minimal, like bare minimum, I'd say like 600. And that's,
This,
That's minimum.
Yeah.
that's cheap.
yeah, that's what I mean, that's like, hey, I don't recommend that, but then if we're going that low, I'd then bump it up to, for the underinsurance or the expanded replacement costs. They just passed this law, I believe a year or two ago, after the Marshall Fire. It used to be that each policy that required 20% of expanded replacement costs. They bumped that up, I believe, when it renews January 2024, so it should all be there. The minimum now is 50% expanded replacement costs. Meaning if you covered a home for 100,000, you have another 50,000 just in case it costs more. Typically, I'll bump in Eagle County, I'll bump that at least to 75%, if not 100%. Just so that you have, it's an easy way to add a lot more coverage without a lot more cost to the policy. And that way the homeowner knows, okay, worst case scenario, I definitely have enough to rebuild. I think his was for the,
I was just first in regards to, is there anything in the works? So, for example, as you mentioned, and River Valley is flood, so there's a government insurance for that. All companies have Vail, and the only, sure on is
Awesome.
it's very, no, it's going to be less, but it was passing with the state farm.
Yep.
And when the public goes in, it almost feels faithfulness that state farm covers it. That's a diversification. It's a lot of factor. There is obviously sluggish performance.
Yeah.
Sure. Is there?
So there is, that would be this, the fair access to insurance.
Yeah.
They passed that law. There's a couple caveats to that, which it doesn't exclude Eagle County, but the maximum, the total that policy would pay out for a home is $750,000.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's great. Maybe you can try to violation.
Yeah, but that's basically it, and then 5 million for like commercial properties.
And it's nothing.
No, just,
Government, insurance.
I mean, in a perfect world, they would say, you know, it'd be like a FEMA would come along and say, hey, we're gonna. You know, Safeco, Travelers, Progressive, you can pull the wildfire risk out, and we're gonna, you know, take like a FEMA flood type policy out for wildfire. But in this political climate, the chances of them passing that are, you know, very, very slim to none. But yeah, ideally that would be it, just because you're right. I mean, if State Farm were to pull out, like I think they did in California, that's a big issue. The other issue is just underinsurance, or I'm sorry, like the secondary insurance market. So like Chubb, for instance, you know, used to write a bunch, they'd take basically anything as long as they had everything. But their secondary insurance, who they would then sell the policies to, kind of dried up. So they literally stopped accepting, you know, any new business. I had a client who had was selling one house in the Valley Club in Portiera, was buying a cheaper one almost right across the street, and they wouldn't offer coverage. Although they said, you know, kind of back to the current insurance trends, that was like 4 months ago. A month ago, they actually jumped on and said, hey, we're starting to reopen back up here now. So you are starting to see some companies get a little bit more of an appetite for up here. You just need to really, you know, if you have a buyer who's buying, that insurance deadline didn't used to be, you know, it wasn't really top of mind for most people. Now, like right when you go to a contract, I encourage your clients to say, hey, call your agent, or here's a list of, you know, 2 or 3 in the valley. Call these people, you know, get on top of it right now to make sure that you are covered. But I think somebody else had a question. Is it you? Oh, okay.
What was it called in the budget?
They still haven't come out with the definitive cost, I don't believe.
There's some public service, I think it was the power lines.
Yeah, they said a power line, I heard an underground like pole burn, but I believe it was power.
Yeah, the coal seam was, that theory was shot down. The railing theory was the power line getting going out.
There's a report out that's available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, to prepare for the wildfire season, I put this slide on just because the number one thing is what I always tell my new clients, or as a realtor, if your client's buying a house and moving in, the easiest time to take an inventory of everything in your house is when you're unpacking boxes. Just walk around with a video camera or a camera and take pictures, just because that's really what's going to jog your memory. Like, oh, this picture, you know, this is a really nice piece, and this, you know, was an family heirloom, or it really jogs your memories to take a video of each room. That way, if there is a big fire, it's such a traumatic experience. You're really, you know, you're either going to skip over whole rooms, or you're going to forget about stuff until years down the road when you're moving back into the house. So that was a big thing. Again, call your insurance agent just to make sure that your coverage is adequate. I always encourage my clients, or we'll at least reach out to them every 18 months and just say, hey, I'm just touching base. Has anything changed? Oh, you finished your basement for $100,000, or you did a huge kitchen remodel. A lot of people don't think to talk to your agent when you're doing that type of stuff. So it's always good just to have a conversation. Back to the 5 feet rule, that 5 feet is probably the most important. Just making sure that it's clear. Again, you know, back to the firewood, I see a lot of firewood stacked up either against the house or under the deck. And you don't think about that, but that's, you know, if an ever lands on that, that's a huge problem. And again, back to the people coming out and inspecting your house, and they see that, that's, you know, a huge, you know, X mark.
Something after that.
Oh.
That happened to us. That was through the townhouse there, and our next neighbor, and a lot of people had their whole winter season, or, you know, whatever was left. And it took like 2 years, but our HOA finally said, you can't have any of that stacked up as one way out on those townhouses. And it was right near the stairs, so you wouldn't be able to really get out. April to October, I think our HOA went by. So it is worth it to bring it up in an HOA meeting, even though it might take a couple of years to get done.
Yep. And that's another good point, just, you know, if you are a part of an HOA, get involved with it. Just because you can, some HOAs don't think about that at all. If it's like a condo HOA, you really need to be thinking about your master policy. You know, if you have a small water leak, you wanna file a claim for that, just because it's in the valley. I've heard of quite a few stories where they filed a small claim and then the HOA, the master policies dropped them, and that is a massive headache these days to get coverage after that. So, you know, I had one client call and he was talking to me about it, and yeah, I think we're gonna have to file, it's like a $12,000 thing with our HOA. I was like, highly, you know, do not recommend doing it for that cost.
John, well, I have a question for you and Katie. You know, one of the things we see a lot is a homeowner might get a letter that says, from the insurer, that says, I have to clear cut, unfortunately, clear cut 200 feet of all trees and shrubs, you know, on my property. Or I have to do X, Y, and Z, and, you know, that may be not in alignment with what an assessment has, and so I wonder if you get that, if you're seeing that here, there's sometimes just the insurance requirements are more stringent, or because they haven't had the benefit of having a qualified professional on the ground, they may just be from LiDAR or some other, air photo. How do you resolve that with your assessment?
I will say that for questions like that, I don't see it happen a ton, and usually if it does, it depends on the insurance company. If it's an insurance company that's not based here, then they might circle a space on the map and say everybody within this area has to do clear cutting. But once again, you know, going out and trying to work with homeowners to mitigate that risk, giving them an assessment coupled with a certification, they can take that to their insurance provider. John, what's your feeling on that?
So that's usually when it's good to have that assessment done, because you can come, they're not like non-renewing you, but you can go back and say, hey, I've already been proactive, I've taken these steps. This is what they've signed off on, and here's what I've already done. That's where the assessment really helps, just because you have ammunition to go back and you're not just gonna call them and say, hey, I think I'm safe, right? You know, looks good. If you have this certificate that you can send to the underwriters, they could waive it at that point, you know. That's obviously case by case, insurer by insurer basis, but having that ammunition definitely helps. And again, it's hard to backtrack and say, well, I'm gonna get this done. If you already have it, it's a lot easier to use with that.
Can you divulge your most liberal underwriter? We have most success with maybe?
Most success in this area, I'd say probably Safeco. Travelers actually just opened back up, but they have a bunch of other requirements, so you have to bring everything over with them. It really, you know, it's still on a case by case, or even if you're in Gypsum, if you're in Edwards, if you're in Avon, it you know, each, you know, just those 3 towns I have, you know, different, just from when the person calls and they'll say, all right, in my head, I think we're gonna go with this company, but we'll, you know, go from there.
What do you do if you want to protect your house from fires, but your neighbors that are, you know, a 1/4 acre lot, you got a house right next door on the east side, and they don't do anything.
I mean, that's,
Kind of disaster.
it is, but it's still, you know, if they, you know, to your point where if you get a letter saying you need to do X, Y, and Z, and say, well, I know these guys haven't, but I've done everything that I possibly can, here's my letter. That could kind of help, but it just, again, goes back to just having the you know, conversations with your neighbor. Which again, out here can be tough if they're only here for 2 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just.
We always tell people to do the work, and you don't know, there's so many factors that go into a situation when firefighters pull up to an area. And they may look at your house and say, okay, that's the easiest one to defend, we're gonna focus on that one. And so you never know how far being proactive will take you, but it's never a detriment, right? So there's never a reason not to do it, even if your neighbors, maybe they'll come along for the ride later, hopefully they'll see you doing it, but at a minimum with the insurance, the response, that's what we see is, you know, being proactive is always the way to go. Same, I agree. So,
Usually with those folks, I like to tell people to focus on their own properties first, and then, maybe the people next door will notice that you're doing something. So yeah, generally it's always focus on your own house, and then if they are around, try to speak up to them and.
And they could also, back to the assessment point where they might think, oh my God, they're gonna, she's asking me to cut half of my trees down and do this and that. If you get it done and say, hey, look, I only needed to do 2 or 3 things and my property still looks the same, there's probably a lot more enticing for that owner at that point to say, all right, now I'll, kind of tackle it and do the same type of thing.
Intrinsically, they should all be increasing the value of the property too.
Yeah.
If you're taking it farther away from the flat, question.
Yeah, it's, it's easier to sell a property that has this, hey, here's the certificate already versus. Yeah, exactly.
So, we're talking valuation of the house. If the insurance company values it at $1 amount and the appraiser values it as a different.
So that goes, obviously the appraisal comes into the property value as well, and not just the home. Depending, like if the appraiser uses the cost approach, that's also, I'll ask the client, say, hey, can I see the appraisal? And if the cost approach, he values it at X per square foot to rebuild, and then total estimate of cost new. So I always use that as kind of like a third point of reference. Because he also, he'll pull out kind of the property value too. Because I get that question a lot of, oh, well, I'm paying X, Y, X for my house, why are we gonna insure for this? Again, it's, the property value, and if you can show them on the appraisal, this is where it's all kind of split out, that helps a lot too. Moving on, this is a really old declarations page from a policy, but the most important things are like coverage A, the dwelling with expanded replacement costs. What that is, that's, basically what the insurance company is estimating that house to be rebuilt at. So in this one, it was, 637,000, and then that's plus whatever the expanded replacement cost is. So is it, in this day and age, is it 50%, 100%, 75%? Or in, to your question, or if it says guaranteed replacement cost, you still want to get that number pretty close anyway, just because if you're insuring it for 100,000 and it's a $1.5 million rebuild, that company is going to question how you came up with that number and if you were just trying to get the cheapest policy out there. So I would say, that's the most important thing. The other structures, that's just anything not physical attached. So if you have a shed, if you have a guest house, a pool house, you really got to talk to your agent to bump that up, just because that's only calculated at 10% of the dwelling, unless you bump that up for it, even an external garage, anything. Personal property, that's everything that you're moving into the house. So your clothing, your TVs, your couches, everything down to your socks. But again, it sounds weird or cheesy, but if you pick the house up and shake it upside down, anything that falls out is going to fall into that category.
What about jewelry?
So that was my next point. Jewelry falls into that, but there are limits for stuff like jewelry, fine art, silverware, firearms. There are sub limits for that. So if you have a lot of jewelry, I always ask my clients for that. Or any expensive paintings, if you have a lot of firearms, you want to schedule all of that stuff as well.
What about piano?
Piano, yeah, some musical instruments, depending on the company, have limits for that. Out here, bicycles, some companies do not have limits for bicycles, and it just falls under the personal property. And when I'm having that initial conversation with clients, I'll take that into consideration, just because once you start scheduling, the bicycles are extremely expensive to schedule, just because they get stolen quite a bit. But all of that stuff, would fall under the personal property. Coverage D, the loss of use. That's an important one. Again, back to the Marshall fire, that was a big issue as well. That's basically paying to rent a home comparable to yours until they rebuild yours. In the Marshall fire, a lot of companies this one has actual loss of stay, meaning we'll rent you a house until we get you back into yours. That's the best. Some companies do 24 months. That's pretty good. But I mean, even in the Marshall fire, with the amount of building that needed to be done, and permits, 24 months is probably the quickest I've seen somebody get back into their home. And then it goes down to 12 months, and then other insurance companies just have a dollar amount. So you just need to kind of factor in, I'll at least do 24 months, if not 36, if it's a dollar amount, and say, all right, this gives you, $4,500 a month if you needed to rent a place, just because, again, as we all know, renting up here is incredibly expensive. If you have to.
Oh, and you still have to pay your mortgage, so you.
Yeah, so Yep, yeah, so that's why, this is essentially gonna pay for your rent so that you can still pay your mortgage until you get back.
Is that policy for pay for your mortgage and also pay for your rent of the house?
No, so you pay for your mortgage, this is just, it's additional living expenses, so you had to rent a home, if the home is 10 miles further from your work, they'll pay for the additional fuel, any additional living expenses you
But
incur.
your house is burnt down. And you still have to pay mortgage on the house.
Yeah, so with the Marshall Fire, again, certain mortgage companies with the Marshall Fire were willing to kind of do like the COVID thing where they forgave the people for 2 or 3 months, just tacked it on to the end. That was a different when the whole neighborhood burned down, and it's still dependent on what company held your mortgage. But yeah, the mortgage company wants its money, that's why they check your insurance policy to make sure you have it so that you can still pay it, as opposed to just walking away and letting them deal with it.
Anybody can get this one over. You take the money and run.
So it depends on the insurance company and how the policy is written. Some of the Marshall people did that and again, with your mortgage company too, some mortgage companies are gonna want you to rebuild and then sell. If you own the home outright, then yes, some companies will let you just take the total dwelling amount. Say, see you later, list the property for sale and you're done. But I would definitely check with the agent or policy.
I've heard this, I hope it's not true, but some insurance companies have clause in their policy that said, okay, yeah, we'll pay you to, but we insured you to rebuild your house, but you gotta start construction, if what you're insured for isn't enough. The owner has to come up with a difference, and if you can't come up with a difference, then they don't pay anything. You heard that?
I haven't heard of that. Luckily, again, I didn't deal with the underinsurance. That's something that I would not want to deal with.
No, that's like the worst case scenario.
Yeah, because they don't, I'd find that hard to believe just because legally, you're paying for a policy that insures it for, 500,000, so. Rebuild me to get me to this point.
I think it was true though, because some people were stuck with. We can only rebuild in order to get the insurance to cover it, but we have to come up with a $200,000 or $300,000 difference to rebuild for what they wanted to rebuild to. So that's where it's also tricky if you're in an HOA that has certain square footage rules and that, so the Marshall Fire, the city or the town of Superior had to do some rezoning, I believe, to allow different types of homes.
And they also waived some green, the new energy efficient laws, they waived that for the rebuilds just because they're like, it's gonna cost me another 200 grand to do, solar panels or do this. So they waived a lot of those laws to help those people out. Yeah. The only other thing I'd touch on here is just check what your deductible is. Just because, to get the prices way down, some people take really big deductibles, or it might be your deductible might be $500. I always encourage my clients, you don't want to file a small home insurance claim now, so, I'd raise the deductible to whatever you're comfortable with. You don't want to do a $20,000 deductible if you couldn't come up with that money, to your point. But if it's $2,500 to $5,000 deductible, you're gonna save a lot per year on your policy. And also a lot more insurers are getting a lot more, if you're willing to take on a bit more of the risk yourself, they'll offer the policy versus if you wanted a $500 deductible, they might not even offer a quote.
What do you mean by risk?
Well, so if you took a $5,000 deductible, the insurance company is looking at it.
Risk by.
Yeah.
Lowering or.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Did you have a question? And tips for avoiding underinsurance, I think we've kind of already talked about most of these. Most important is use an agent who knows the area. Most commonly up here, I have somebody who's buying a house, has a client who is from Texas or Florida or California, and they want to use an agent down there. The cost to rebuild is gonna be completely different than what it's gonna cost in the valley. And the realtors I work with, I always just say, hey, if they want to get a quote from there, great, but at least call one or two agents up here so that you kind of. Get ahead of that agent in Texas might only have one company who can write up here. So you want to get ahead of the not being able to find insurance type thing too. Then different, back to different carriers have different rates in the county, much less in the country. So you want to check all over. And yeah, we have guaranteed replacement costs is another thing. But these are the bills that we kind of already talked about.
There was another, and maybe John, you know about this, there was another bill, I believe, like Bud and other folks from Comparion were engaged in this, but it was a proposal to have fire linked to the real estate transaction process and have a hazard disclosure associated with it. That didn't pass, but it was I didn't personally agree with the legislation because it was only targeting like 10, maybe one was 10 or 12 counties. One of them included Eagle. Ironically, they were many counties that already have done something about wildfire. And so that did not pass, but the reason I raise it is because oftentimes when we see legislation tied to fire, if it doesn't pass, then they try and resurrect it in some more palatable form. But I think it's something to watch for because real estate disclosures have been kind of hanging out there as a question for a while. They do that in California. Colorado looks sometimes now to California how they're handling fire topics. So I don't know if you've heard about that, but I feel like it's something to keep on the radar.
Yeah, I haven't heard too much about it just because I remember it got brought up in one of the meetings, but it
Yeah.
didn't pass, but yeah.
Something like, let's say the roof was a wood-shaped roof. And so that would be something that was a wildfire issue. They were gonna make the seller fix it first before they put it on the market. And I mean.
Which
that's
could be, again,
ridiculous.
it's.
Yeah, so that's how.
Then again, back to the duplex, I mean, maybe the seller can't fix it because the other side doesn't want it.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, back to I guess the final slides, the claims process, if your house does burn down. I always encourage my clients to call your agent first, because they're gonna kind of walk, that's why you have the agent. They're gonna kind of educate you on how to walk through the claim. Do you take pictures? Do you, in this car insurance or home insurance, same thing, call the agent first. And then you start the claim. Usually like when it's a market fire, it's a wildfire, each company sends out like basically an RV and they all line up and it's like an insurance village where they have an adjuster with a checkbook that's ready to start cutting your checks right away. Here's your first loss of use, here's a bunch for your personal property. And they'll just start, right away. So you really want to get started on the claim as quickly as possible as well. And then the third bullet, put together a list of all the items that you lost. That goes back to the other slide where if you take a video or have pictures, that's so much easier. Because again, it's going to be a traumatic experience for your client or for you if you're in a wildfire to recall every single thing that you have in the house. So if you have a picture, itemized list, something that will really help.
Keep it in somebody else's house.
Yeah, keep it at somebody, I was about to say, keep it in a lockbox at the bank. You can store it on the cloud now, anywhere, just not, in your house. A lot of times too, if it's a huge wildfire, the company will have a list of apartment complexes, homes for rent, stuff like that. So they can help you find a house. You don't have to use that house. If you had a friend willing to rent you a house or something like that, you're more than welcome to. But they'll look to them if you're having trouble finding a place to live. Again, the adjuster will put together an estimate for rebuilding the home. You can take that and then take it to a local builder and say, hey, you guys are way off, or this is, the difference. So I just encourage my clients to, get the multiple estimates from a couple local builders. And then you can go back and say, hey, the framing is gonna be more, or this is gonna cost more. Or sometimes the debris removal, they might be way off. And then the bottom one, if the home does completely burn down, right away, that first check he gets 30% of the personal property, whatever the amount is, right away. So yeah, I think that was about it for me.
So we put together a list of some of the most important action items that you guys should take away with you today. The first one, well, the first two are actually pretty low hanging fruit. They come from my lexicon, and the other two are from, well, John and myself again, I suppose. But sign up for a REALFire assessment. So you can go to realfire.net and fill out an application. I usually turn those applications around within a week. And I can get you scheduled for a REALFire assessment. The second one that's super low hanging fruit is sign up for the Eagle County Alert System. So it's bcalert.org is where you'll go in order to sign up for an account. And then the alerts come in two different forms. So one is through the Everbridge application, which is the format we've been using for a couple of years now. The other one that we just launched is called ReachWell. ReachWell is a new application for you to receive these notifications. But the cool thing is that if you know anyone whose primary language is not English, this application offers those notifications in 100 languages. So if you know people who don't speak English, don't speak Spanish, this can most likely cover their language preference. Please review your insurance policy. The last thing that we want is to experience total losses within the county. And then if we do, we want to make sure that we can rebuild what we have already. So, John, do you have any points to make for that one?
No, but that, like, for the REALFire assessment, I meant to say, you know, if you are part of like a condo HOA, like Katie came out in the DARS a while ago, but you know, again, that helps with the HOA master policy. If she comes out and she gave a couple of recommendations, you do them, and then that way, if you do get dropped or they, you know, your company has questions, you can give this to the underwriter and say, hey, we're being proactive. This is what the steps we've already taken.
Perfect, thank you. Last big one for today is to just share this information that you learned today about the REALFire program, about insurance, with your clients. If there are people who are new to the Valley, this is meant to be shared amongst everybody. So please share that information with your clients. And yeah, if you want to sign up for a REALFire assessment, either go online or you can talk to me immediately following the presentation. And also too, if you want to volunteer, just let me know and I'll take it from there.